And so I bring it back to that organizing piece because I think so much of it is a reframe, and a reframing of how folks approach and think about their own neighborhoods, in cities. And you mentioned, that some people can't even get to the next school, but here and also New York City, you have segregation within districts where people are right next door to each other, but still don't really might not acknowledge that segregation. Another long-winded way to kind of get back to, I think, Leah, some of those grassroots organizing pieces. Your book, which I loved, starts with community organizing and sort of ends with community organizing. You start with the Chicago Map Twins, and then you end with long-term areas and communities that have worked to sustain integration. Can you delve a little bit deeper into ways that advocates can sort of strike this balance with community engagement, and then having that community engagement sort of influence change?
Sure. Well, both are essential, right? We need, what we argue in Just Action is that to enact the changes that are necessary to redress and challenge segregation, we need an activated civil rights movement around the country of local groups that are formed in our own communities, educated about how we got to be a segregated society, and then activated and taking on issues that they can advocate for to change local policy and programs that impact segregation and could have an impact on challenging and redressing it. Now, we understand that, building this new activated civil rights movement around the country isn't going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of community organizing. And we have to start by building groups in our own communities willing and ready and able to take on local issues. Now, those committees and groups in our own communities, they need to be biracial, multi-ethnic, leadership that's both Black and white. And we understand that in itself can seem daunting because we live in such segregated communities. We don't necessarily have natural social contact with people of other races. Just from going to the grocery store, dropping our kids off at school, we tend to see people of the same race. So if we want to build those cross-race relationships, we have to take some extra intentional steps, some efforts at community organizing to bring people together from other race parts of town. So the Map Twins example that you referenced, we started the book with that as one of a few different examples we gave of groups that have taken those intentional efforts to bring people together and build those social relationships. So the Map Twins project in Chicago was started by an artist named Tanika Johnson. She took the unique layout of Chicago, which is laid out in a perfect grid. So when you fold the map in half, the north side and south side of the same street sit on top of each other. Now, the north side of Chicago is mostly white. The south side is mostly Black. So when she folded the map in half, houses sat perfectly on top of each other from the north and south side of town. She called those homes Map Twins and photographed the homes and did a photography exhibit to show that, these homes aren't that different, but the context they exist in is very different because of the consequences of the segregation of those neighborhoods. Then she introduced herself to the residents of the homes and asked if they wanted to meet their map twin. Most of them said that yes. They met each other, they toured each other's neighborhoods, they started to get to know each other, realized they had a lot in common, and started to look at how their neighborhoods were different. They then formed block twin groups and had, block parties and neighborhood beautification efforts where they supported each other. And they started to learn how, the segregation of Chicago impacted them personally and how it, affected how they see their own neighborhoods and their own city. Now, this was an art project, obviously. So then the next step would be an organizer working with these block twin groups to then start to see and investigate why Chicago looks the way it does, why their neighborhoods are so segregated, why they've lived in Chicago their whole lives and had never met someone from the other side of town or been to the other side of town. And then they could start to look at ways that they could take on issues to challenge that. So we gave other examples in the book too, a group in Winston-Salem that was formed with through 6 congregations of a Presbyterian church. 3 were white, 3 African-American. And they formed an interracial dialogue that had, equal representation from the white and Black churches. That group then went on to advocate for a citizen police review board in their city to monitor police behavior and abuse of African Americans, to advocate for including an African American history curriculum in the schools. They built Habitat for Humanity homes. So sort of the coupling of, we need to do this community organizing, build these relationships, build these groups that have some social capital and social relationships they can use to move forward and advocate for change. And then in the book, we give a lot of examples of what those groups could work on. And, you know, what we argue in Just Action is there's so many things we can do in our own communities that will have an impact on undoing segregation and remedying its consequences, that it sort of doesn't matter where we start. Any of these groups could just choose one, start there, and really begin to make a change that way.
I'm just curious, because I think of all these great examples that you have in your book. Was there a long list when you were when you were researching this on places and communities that were doing this, or was it easy to select, or was there a lot of different examples? Because I always think of and wonder about about how other places across the country are doing this, and how so often there are a lot of different actions that are overlooked, or it's that idea of like hopelessness of, oh, there's only a few out there that are doing this. So I'm just wondering, in your research experience, if you had a lot of examples and really had to narrow it down.
Yeah, well, I think we had a spreadsheet of all of the topics, and some of them started with, we knew it was a topic we wanted to discuss, and then we found a group working on it. And some of it started with, we knew a local community was working on this issue, and then we delved into the topic or the issue itself. And I would say, from writing this book, I started this project working on this book not sure that we would find enough examples, enough things that people could do to really impact segregation, because it feels so intractable, so overwhelming, so like just the way things are. And I found in researching the book that there are so many examples. There's a lot more that we couldn't fit in, a lot of communities that we couldn't get to that are doing important work on this. We are continuing to write about all of those in a Substack column, which we can give you the information later. But so I'm coming out of the writing process and now speaking about the book everywhere, very hopeful that there is a lot happening around the country, in all sorts of types of communities in all parts of the country working on these issues. So it does give me hope that despite what's happening on the national level in this country, there's a lot of community engagement and appetite and hunger for changing these entrenched sort of ways of being.
Let me add that from all these examples that we had, and from the research that we did, we picked examples with the following things in mind. One is, we wanted to pick some examples from everywhere in the country to show that this was not just the kind of thing that people were doing in deeply blue places, but that they were everywhere. If we wanted to write about land trusts, we picked a place in North Carolina, for example. We wanted to always pick examples that showed both African Americans and whites working together, because our view is that we can't accomplish the kind of change we need without that kind of coalition, without that kind of biracial movement. African Americans don't have the political power on their own to change this country. So those are the kinds of considerations that we used, both geographical diversity and to make sure that we showed both African Americans and whites working together in different places.